All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be doing my favorite subject in modern history. Modern history, I would consider 20th century forward, um, World War II. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started with World War II, one of my most faves. All right, course of World War II. We're going to look at a few things here. World War II really kind of kicked off in 1939 when the Nazi Party had really already come to rise in power, and Adolf Hitler had become the primary leader of Germany at that time. Well, in 1940, Germany begins to start bombing British cities, and in 39 they had invaded Poland, as well as a few other locations, and started basically casting Jews into what were called ghettos. And they began to mistreat those people, and they had a specific political and racial agenda. Now, in 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December. And in 1942, the Japanese were defeated at the Battle of Midway. Okay, and Midway was a literally midpoint, like a turning point in the Pacific War. In 1943, we see that the Germans were defeated at Stalingrad, which is right there located on the Volga River in Russia. Um, and the Soviet army was able to keep them at bay there. The city bore the name of the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. So Stalingrad was a city he was not willing to give up, and he pretty much threw everything he had at it. And in 1944, Allied forces would invade Normandy, which is a place in France, on D-Day, June 6th of 1944. If you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, that opening scene is D-Day. All right, let's do this. 86.5. We're going to compare the ramifications of World War II on South Carolina and the United States as a whole, including the training of the Doolittle Raiders and Tuskegee Airmen, the building of additional military bases, and the rationing of and bond drives, as well as the return of economic prosperity. All right, so we need to talk about United States isolation. All right, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also known as FDR, he'd been the president for a long time. Okay, this man was elected president 4 times, 4 terms. They would actually change the law after him so that could no longer be possible anymore. But the Neutrality Acts were passed in the 1930s, and it prevented the United States from becoming involved or even choosing sides in a foreign war, in a European war, transatlantic type stuff. In other words, we were trying to become wholly focused on the Americas, what's called the Western Hemisphere. All right, in between the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean was what we were concerned with. All right, you can see this cartoon here, the end of the nap. America, you can see that eagle is dressed up like Uncle Sam with the hat, and the Japanese woke him up. Okay, it's almost like a Dr. Seuss character type deal going on here. And the Japanese little cartoon figures woke him up from his slumber, and boy, did they wake us up. So let's talk about South Carolina before the war. The United States had begun drafting men into the military. You know, a draft is conscription, and it's a type of conscription that's involuntary. In other words, the government says, go, you go. All right. Camp Jackson was expanded to become Fort Jackson. Yes, it's the same Fort Jackson that we all know and love today, right over there in Columbia. And the Naval Yard increased production of destroyers. So we had a lot of stuff going on in Charleston as well as Columbia. You can see an example of a DDG, a DD. DD stands for destroyer. It's a designation, a letter designation that the military still uses to this day for their ships and fixed wing aircraft and stuff like that. They have alphanumeric numbers to represent the model. So you can see a destroyer there with 5-inch guns, main guns, and a lot of 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter cannons for anti-aircraft operations. And destroyers were really focused on escorting the other ships and hunting submarines. That was a destroyer's major job. All right. No, you're supposed to shove him over my back. Okay. So this is this is a representation of how the Japanese and the Germans were trying to work together as the Axis powers, them along with Italy, in order to topple America and to keep us out of the war. They did not want us to become involved in this war. Um, and so what ends up happening is the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and they get us involved in the war. So, time to swap the old book for a set of brass knuckles. So, rules for a gentleman's conduct in combat. You see, Uncle Sam's reading that, and they quickly learned, hey, we're going to have to do something different here, and do some bare knuckle brawling, especially in the Pacific Theater against the Japanese. And you see the Japanese person's drawn with a dagger and a stick, and the German has a brick. In other words, they're not going to fight fair. Okay, not going to fight fair, and we're going to have to learn how to do that too. So Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Japan attacked the Philippines as well. And December 8th, 1941, Congress declared war, and Hitler and Mussolini declared war on us. So Germany and Italy and Japan were all openly ready to attack us. You can see a picture in the upper left of Ford Island, which is an island in the center of Pearl Harbor, and you see Battleship Row on the top part of that picture, and you see the battleships grouped into twos and torpedoes hitting some of them, and then you see the wreckage of what looks to be not the Oklahoma. That's probably the Arizona. It looks like the wreckage of the USS Arizona there on the bottom, one of its main towers, after it was sunk by a high-level bomber, Japanese bomber. All right, we'll finish up with this slide for today, the Doolittle Raiders. They trained in Colombia. James Doolittle, you can see a picture of him on the bottom right, was the commander, and he was a very, very well-known aviator and pilot. And they engaged in an air attack on Tokyo. They literally dealt the first blow back onto the Japanese. And this news lifted the morale. They took Army bombers, B-25 bombers, land-based Army planes, put them on Navy aircraft carriers, and attacked the mainland of Japan. It was unheard of, it was unprecedented, and it was an incredible act of bravery. And it was essentially a suicide mission, knowing very well they probably wouldn't come back. And some of the men did die on the mission, but a lot survived. So it was really incredible. They were mixing two technologies that had never been mixed before. And in STEM, that's something really interesting for us to look at. All right, so we'll pause here for today. Make sure you do your classwork, your attendance, and your Hawk Focus, and you guys have a great Monday and a great beginning to your week. All right, guys.